All right, this video is information about sensitivity, and it's for the people that want to get into AM radio broadcast band DXing late at night, listening to other stations out of state. Also, during the day, if you have a really good radio, you can pick up low power AM stations, community stations that might be maybe 8 miles from your house. They're only meant for a small area. Now, uh, WGHT was like Pompton Lakes. And the first time I discovered it was 1500. It shut down since then. It's come back up. But in other words, that was the first time I heard a station that was low power when I was in New Jersey. And I actually bicycled up there and passed the transmitter. But anyway, that was when I realized that I had a low power station that didn't drift in and out, that was a certain strength during the day. And then at night, 1500, it would drop its power way back. And 1500 would be a station out of the Philadelphia area, I believe. But anyway, what happened living here, basically the same thing happened. I realized that I left the radio tuned to 740 kilohertz, which is Zoomer radio, on the that would be the Hellcrafters SX42. Next morning I turn on, I'm like, man, that radio's still picking that station up. And then I realized that there was a station during the day that was low power in Pennsylvania. Since then I found out there's also a station that's at 720. One does politics and one does Jesus stuff, all right? So by having those low power stations, you can test the sensitivity of a radio. So then it was a matter of going through all my radios and finding out how many of my radios can pick those two stations up. And one of them is the DX390 can pick it up. And no surprise, this is now I gotta think of it, a GE Super Radio 2. That's it here. That picks it up really well, even slightly better than the DX390. And the audio has more bass to it. This radio has better bass. So now that I know that I had stations that some of my radios just won't pick up. Now, I told you, the Hellcrafters, the radio I hated, so poorly, cheaply made inside, picks it up like it's no problem. And then I know my ICOM R71A will pick the station up, both 720 and 740, but you can't understand what the person's saying. You can hear the carrier. So then I went through my national NC57s, which I love that radio. It doesn't even hear the carriers. So the last video I started telling you, I'm going to go through and I'm going to start reading up on what are the sensitivity numbers on some of these radios. Now, one radio, it's a top radio. It actually says something like 1 microhenry, 1 microvolt sensitivity of 1 microvolt sensitivity on frequencies 6 megahertz and up. Well, what about the AM broadcast band on the radio? No mention. Other radios, no mention about sensitivity at all in the manuals. You can't find it. The better radios proudly list sensitivity and the at what frequencies. And some of them are very misleading, like that one microvolt sensitivity, better than 1 microvolt sensitivity on frequency 6 megahertz and higher. That's bullshit. See, if you read that real quick, you go, wow, 1 microvolt sensitivity. The other thing I want to tell you, the only super radio, this one here, it lists the microvolt sensitivity at 20. Something's wrong there. This radio is much better than that. And that Trio, the Lafayette radio, made in Japan, that is a 1.65 or 5.6, I can never remember, microvolt sensitivity. You knew right away when you're tuning to the dial. It gets the station, and you can actually understand what they're saying. And it doesn't drift in and out because it's just a low power station. And in order to receive it, you have to have the sensitivity. Now, when you get up on 1600, which is Suite 16, which is another low power station, when you get up higher in frequency, there's a tendency for the station to actually drift with atmospheric conditions. But I was using 1600, and I noticed the radios worked better on band B on 1600 than it did on A, and that's when I realized you're at the very end of the coil's tuning area and the Q. See, a lot of it has to do with Q of the coils. Now, one of the ads you'll run across on the internet is they show a Drake R8A. That's an incredible radio. I've never seen one in person, but it's supposed to be a really incredible radio and very eccentric to operate. So they show that one. Then they show the Sony 2010. Now, I owned a Sony 2010. I was very nervous that I was going to drop it. It was $299 or more. And I ended up reselling it. I told you the story. But anyway, that radio got a station from Long Island, way down at the bottom of the band. And none of the other radios I had would get the station, even with a box loop. So when it comes to DXing, you're DXing a signal that's skipping in. So that doesn't really mean your radio's that sensitive. What really separates the men from the boys, or the good radios from the crap, is the low powers that it can get. And that's what I've discovered. You know, moving here 1600, but before that, it was WGHT Pompton Lakes. I believe it's still operational. But that was the radio station that, if someone asked me about the sensitivity of the radio, I would dial in WGHT and realizing where I am. And I believe it's a 100-watt station. It's around mountains. So you're getting some of the ground wave and some of the signal. So when you have a really good radio, which in the case when I found WGHT 1500, I had a Hammerland HQ140X, I believe it is, or 120X. It got it, and my other radios didn't. And I had already sold the Sony off. And I start realizing that certain radios, even if they're expensive, they don't do the AM broadcast band very well. If you read the specs, you'll see they dumbed them down. Now, I told you, the woman at the radio store used to hand the phone to me. And this guy had told me this thing, that the reason we knocked the sensitivity down on the AM radio band is to prevent overloading. Well, what it is, that AM band in the radio is crap. And I want to go back to, I think I forgot, I screwed up on the one part. You see this ad for a Drake R8. You see they show you the 2010. And all of a sudden they show you an SDR. What a joke. You know, software defined radio. No way you can compare an SDR to a Sony 2010 or a Drake R8. That's a real, when you do your searches, that thing pops up. They have it all figured out. But anyway, over the years, 1947 radios, most AM broadcast band on them work very well. They might not work really great. Like I've discovered the NC57. It's got the triple tuned. It's got the three-section RF, the three-section capacitor. It's got 3 IF cans. It has everything in the radio you would expect it would get to 2 low-powered stations, and it doesn't. And here's the next thing you got to get in your mind. When they have an RF amp and a converter tube, instead of a mixer and an oscillator, so you need 3 tubes in the radio to be able to get the low powers. You can't cheat. So what they did was, instead of putting 3 tubes in, they dropped one of the tubes out. They do have the RF amp and what they call a converter tube. And the converter is both the oscillator and the mixer. And when you do that, you're using the electrons that could make the mixer more sensitive. You're using those electrons to make the oscillator work. So if you know anything about schematics, look at the radio, the front end, and look for an RF amp. Some actually have 2 RF tubes in them, but sometimes they're not both on. Watch out for that. And then you want to have a separate oscillator mixer. Now you'll see that the question on the group, someone says, how come they use a separate RF amp mixer and oscillator? And then a couple people tried to answer it. They couldn't because they never did the work. I'm telling you right now, when you have three tubes, three good tubes, it's better than two tubes. It's just better. And they've done these radios down as time went along. And in 1984, when they had the JRC radio, 525, I believe it was, the Kenwood R5000, and the ICOM R71A, those radios are not good AM DX radios. Now, push to shove on the woman at the shortwave store, and she'd make a comment like, well, you got to get now I'm going to forget a National HQ180A or whatever letter. And that thing has a 1 microvolt front end for AM broadcast. But that thing is a boat anchor. It's actually bigger than a boat anchor. And it's a dual conversion radio, one of the early ones. Guys swear by that radio, but you can't move it around. So the woman at the shortwave store would make fun of the radio, how heavy it was and how old it was. When the person asked them, what's the best radio for AM broadcast DX? And she had her razzmatazz. She was into selling the 3 top radios. She didn't want to sell something that was used. And she didn't want to get into GE super radios. Now, there was this guy, Mike Latard, and he was from Long Island. And he used to come in the store, and he goes, John, he goes, I bought this Sony, not Sony, a GE Super Radio. He said, John, it's better to pick up AM broadcast DX than it is to use his. I think he had a Kenwood 5000 and a box loop. He bought this real $100 box loop, and he says the Sony, the GE Super Radio is better. So at some point, I started collecting GE Super Radios. I have all 4 of them or 3 of them, whatever it is. And the Super Radio 2 is the best because it has a good bass speaker in it. And it's got over here, it's got a little tweeter here. It's got the bass speaker there. And when you have a station on with some bass, it gives you more information. When people say words, sometimes different words, and you're DXing, to have a bass component on certain words helps you understand what the person's saying versus like the DX390. It's tinny. It's very tinny sounding. Probably if I went to headphones, it would be okay. But if you got a little more, first of all, it's Jesus stations and stations about Trump. That's all it is. And it's not like the old days where, in my case, I used to sit up in my room and I had the NC, it was a National NC 125. And I had a big 4-foot box loop. And I would DX all different states. My father bought me the book that listed all the frequencies. And every night I would go up there and go on a different frequency and then tune in a different station and mark it in the little book. And then the next night I would try turning the box loop in a different directions on the same frequency. It became a hobby for one winter, and then on and off years after that. But now you don't get diversity. If you had a station on, it would be a real country western station from other states. It was that was their station, and once in a while they'd play a semi-rock song. But then as talk radio took over, that's all you get at night, just talk. And once in a while, you get a baseball game. Baseball games are still transmitted on AM broadcasts. So I just want to do an update on sensitivity. There's some sneakiness. I'm going to tell you right now, and it's still out there. Like I said that one ad, they show a Drake R8, and then the Sony 2010, and then was it the digital DSP radio, whatever it is. There's no way. Oh, and I got to go look back at the video. Shango took his favorite Russian DSP radio, uh, SDR. I'm getting the letters SDR. Took it out in the desert. He's doing all these other radios. All of a sudden, he pulls out the SDR, software defined radio, SDR. Yeah, he pulls it out, and he runs 50 foot of wire, 30 foot of wire off it. It couldn't get any AM stations, and he was shocked. I'm not shocked. I know, I've looked at the circuit, and I had one guy go, "Oh, that's because the radio you bought isn't made by the Russians." No, it's the same circuit. It's the same ICs. And I can look at it and tell you it ain't going to do it. You know, AM broadcast is tough, especially when you go down to the bottom. You got to have some really good coils in there to have good Q in order to have enough signal for the radio to process for you to get those low AM stations. Now, when you start getting up to 1500 and 1600, that's anything above 1 megacycle, which would be 1010. That becomes almost like shortwave. It's 1 megahertz or 1 megacycles, whichever way you want to say it. Those those frequencies travel further with less power. When you go down to 57, I think 57 might have been the station. No, Fabulous 57? No. Anyway, it was a station that was bottom end of the AM broadcast band. And just one day, I hit it with the Sony 2010. And I went and tested my other radios, and none of my other radios could get the station. And I was like, make sure it was real, that it wasn't some type of ghost or harmonic. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? Yeah, Sony 2010 is pretty good. Now, if you can't afford a Sony 2010, I told you to get a DX390. You should be able to get it for under $50, and it's decent. And there is a mod. You can go in there and take out a resistor, and it becomes more sensitive. I think that's it. All right, that's it.